Daniel Salmon, while he's coming up, I'm going to give a quick introduction. By the way, one quick thing, if you, during the networking prior or after, we've got networking after this, by the way, if you bump into somebody and you don't get their contact information, don't worry, just ping me and say, hey, can you introduce me to so-and-so? I'll make sure you don't have any misconnections. I'd like to make sure that you walk away from these with a connection with someone that you will follow up with. So any of you that have missed a connection, do please email me afterwards. Mr. Salmon, Dan Salmon leads US
Hi, Mark.
Internet Research Team. Hello, good to see you. Thank you
Likewise.
for joining us again. So Dan is the US Internet Research Head at New Street Research since 2022. Prior to that, he spent 18 years at BMO Capital Markets, leading the US Internet and Media Research Team. And Dan is a graduate of Princeton, lives in New York City, and he's got very good analysis. So I'm very much looking forward to see your update. Dan, you have the floor. Thank you very much.
Good stuff. All right. Well, thank you, Mark, and congratulations on another edition of LTR, and as you mentioned earlier, the 20th anniversary of OPW, which I'm sure most people on this list enjoy receiving. So let me just bring up. I've got some slides we're going to walk through and try to help everybody get caught up on what the stock market's view is of online dating today. So let me bring those up here and we'll get underway. All right. Okay. Hopefully everyone can see that okay and not yell and holler and wave your arms at me, and we'll make sure we get the AV sorted out. But as Mark said, my name's Dan Salmon. I lead the internet team at New Street Research. We are an independent equity research firm focused solely on tech, media, and telecom industries. And yes, I lead the internet team, and which includes coverage of Match, covered Bumble, and follow Grindr very closely as well, and a lot of the other smaller public companies. Of course, we get into the whole broader internet space, Google, Meta, Amazon, Netflix, and the like as well. We'll certainly touch on Meta as we continue to see the sort of evolution of online dating apps, and always kind of a small sort of subsector of broader social networks. So let me dive in and first just give a quick summary of what we're going to talk about. First, I think what's probably the most poignant big picture issue for the industry today is Gen Z's sort of different preferences in dating. Both Dan and Jim touched on some elements of this in their conversations as well. Then we'll dig into the numbers. It wouldn't be the financial analyst's portion of the programming if we didn't have some numbers and some exhibits for you to sort of see where the public companies are performing, where our view is on growth of certain industry metrics, and talk a little bit about an issue that I think is flying under the radar quite a bit these days, but certainly something that could help buttress the profit margins in online dating, and that's beginning. But first, before we dive into those, I always think this is the easiest way to kind of frame what I talk about with the sector each day is when we're speaking to large institutional investors, some of the large investors who own Match or Bumble or Grindr. What are the things that they're asking about? Even they typically want to start the conversations by hearing what everyone else is asking about as well. And look, I highlighted it at the top of the list here because it is really the dominant theme in all the conversations about the space these days. Is will Tinder payers grow again? They've been obviously in a bit of a downward turn for several quarters now. Management has continued to reiterate that they think they will grow again on a sequential basis, at least, and tick up in the third quarter of this year. And then as we move into next year in 2025, likely start to see year-over-year growth again. I would say that the market's confidence in them executing on that is still relatively low, as generally their performance has been coming in slightly below expectations the past few quarters. But as recently as we've spoken to them in the past few weeks, they continue to be confident that they'll turn the corner at Tinder. I won't go through the other 9 questions here, but the natural one, number 2 here about, well, what happens if Tinder doesn't begin to grow payers again? Questions about whether private equity investors may look to enter the market if that market leader continues to see more pressure on their valuation. Some of the things we will get into a little bit more, some of the headwinds around Gen Z's different preferences, just the broader big picture around the industry. Of course, most investors want to get into that. At Match specifically, we've had the traditionally called an activist investor in Elliott Management take a position. I dealt with them for over a decade in their investments in a variety of companies, from eBay to Twitter to Nielsen, the media measurement company, over the years. I think they aren't quite the bombastic activists that sometimes that is made out to be, and a little bit more about having a bit more of a normal and engaged conversation with management teams. So that's a popular question as well. And just the last one I'll mention here, maybe the last 2, is obviously the management change at Bumble, as Lydia Jones comes in with a really strong product background to see if can bring Bumble back into the sort of growth that they'd like to see, and the outperformance of Grindr, which joined the public market a little over a year ago, and now finds itself with a bigger market capitalization than Bumble. That's definitely the one that we've seen outperform in the group of late. A few more things there. We'll touch on some of these other things in the presentation, but let's dive into some of these important topics. So, look, we're calling it the Gen Z dilemma. I do think it's still the dilemma. I think Jim mentioned it here a little bit previously about, recognizing that some of the younger generation obviously have different preferences. It's also a generation that is, kind of entering the prime of their dating life and got stuck inside during COVID quite a bit. So there's certainly some reverberating issues that come out of that. But just a few data points. I'm sure you guys have seen, Mark highlights plenty of these in OPW on a regular basis, with lots of survey data out there. And Jim also noted survey data isn't always perfect, but we could have plucked from a dozen or so different surveys that we've seen, which largely add up to a similar conclusion, which is, Gen Z is running into, the frustration points with online dating apps a little bit more frequently. Though you can see here with the exhibit on the left, I mean, it's not completely outrageous and significantly different from other generations necessarily. And on the right here, some of the reasons that are popularly cited for seeking something beyond the dating apps. A little bit more on what Gen Z is looking for. They're looking beyond romance. They're looking for relationships that are non-romantic, that are platonic, even sometimes professional. We'll touch on that a little bit later. So whether it's Bumble having developed their BFF app, which is now an independent app, broken out separately from the core original app, focused on dating.
A quick thing. The slides aren't progressing, by the way. You can't see the slides when you're presenting, but we're seeing still slide 1, by the way.
Okay.
So if you hit the next button, I'll tell you if it's progressing. We'll just do a quick check.
Interesting.
Maybe hit the presentation mode.
That's interesting. I'm in presentation mode on my side.
Okay, it's progressing now. We see slide 3 that we're looking at now. Okay, it's working now.
All right. How about that? You're still seeing slide 3?
Still on slide 3, yep.
Okay.
Slide 3.
Now, is that changing there?
Still on 3.
Interesting. Okay. Well, apologies for that. Presentation mode is working on my side. So let's see.
I'll let you know what I'm saying.
So still sitting on the questions right now.
It's on slide 3, which is the top investor questions. Yeah.
Okay. 1 sec.
There we go. Progressed. It went to 4. No, actually, it's on 7.
Yeah. No, that's all right. Okay. Well, why don't we do this the old-fashioned way? And I don't know if we'll have you. We may not have you in full screen mode. Then I can work through it just as easily this way. But apologies if we get a little bit more of Microsoft PowerPoint functions up above. So
that's good.
So again, here were the questions that we highlighted a moment ago. And as I mentioned, this is some of that aforementioned survey data that we see on Gen Z and where some of their key points of frustration are on the right. And this is where you thankfully jumped in and saved me, Mark, where we see some of the initiatives that are rolling out that go beyond the traditional romantic relationships to more platonic and non-romantic ones. Let's see. And it just to continue into some of the behaviors and the evolution of Gen Z and what they're looking for. Certainly a generation that's looking for a more inclusive environment, greater focus on the female experience, broader gender inclusion. I do think it was a fairly notable change when a couple of years ago, Tinder started to roll out, for example, their relationship goals. You now see that as a common filter for everybody's profile on the app now. So those are some of the changes that we're seeing in innovation as they react to some of the needs and wants of what Gen Z is looking for in a dating app experience. And this I think is a theme that almost surprised Mark that Jim didn't touch on it a little bit in the headlines. Is as this sort of post-COVID era has emerged, starting to see younger people looking beyond what we nominally call an online dating app to other sort of niche social networks. LinkedIn's one that comes up quite a bit. Strava, the running app, comes up, and this is in addition to our view that there's always been a relatively significant presence for online dating in broader social media networks like Facebook and Instagram. So, really a confluence of different preferences by younger people, different types of relationships that they're serving, and different locations that they're increasingly seeking out these types of connections. So as I mentioned, it wouldn't be the financial analyst presentation without some numbers. So let's see how this is flowing through into the major public companies' results, as well as our view on where total industry growth is going, which we maintain in our total industry model. Just a little bit here of context, what we're hearing from the management teams most recently, starting with payers. And as I mentioned at the top, the issue that continues to hang over the online dating sector in the public markets is the declines that Tinder has been seeing. Although again, they have reiterated they expect to see growth come again on a sequential basis, at least in the third quarter of this year. Elsewhere, obviously, numbers are quite a bit more encouraging at that rapidly rising number 2 player within the match portfolio. Hinge continues to see good growth, the main Bumble app as well. Both of them are obviously pursuing international growth strategies more significantly, helping their payer growth overall. We'll see how much more legs there are in those strategies. I think they're both largely penetrated now into most of Europe. I'm interested to see how far their expansions go into emerging markets as well. Digging into a little bit of the data, here are our estimates for total payers overall, and you can obviously see the dip or the valley here in the last year, which we do think will ultimately reverse itself this year. I mean, again, a lot of that is predicated on the largest player in Tinder beginning to grow again. And then at least at this stage, we do think healthy growth can resume through the end of the decade, but it is mentioned with the changes that are going on in the industry today. I'd be lying if we said we had the same conviction in this than we did in our forecast, say 5 to 8 years ago, when we were seeing, pretty much more consistent secular growth in the sector. But we do think that changes to their approaches, as well as continuing to penetrate some of the lower penetrated markets in the emerging markets, can contribute to seeing growth return as well. And this chart, this exhibit here highlights that a little bit. Here we've just broken out payer penetration by region. And once again, naturally, you're seeing a little bit of a dip, but where you can see obviously markets like Europe and North America being more significantly penetrated overall, the opportunity lies in some of those emerging markets like Asia and the rest of the world. And then just to dial in here a little bit to the companies specifically, no surprise here, you see Match head and shoulders above both Bumble and Grindr in terms of their total payer growth. This is across their entire portfolio in the case of Match and Bumble, which of course includes the Badoo app as well. And once again, you can see the dip that we've seen here in the last few quarters where those declines have taken place. But our expectation is that you will see growth resume. A moment of truth for that coming up in the next quarter or two for the company. And then just on the right here, where we estimate market shares are for total payers amongst the large public companies. Here also, we're including the largest player in Asia. We're on a global basis here on the right, so including Momo and Tantan. They've faced some headwinds as well. And then you can see about a little less than a third of a share of total payers globally, we estimate fall in the public market for the most part. Moving over the two elements to generating revenues in a paid subscription and a la carte basis. First is payers, second is the revenue per payer, and we've seen certainly a reaction from the companies in terms of the headwinds that they've been seeing in terms of payer growth, is to enact some new strategies around whether it be new subscription tiers, price increases in selective areas, introductions and more prominence for things like weekly subscriptions, to try to play around on the edges to see where they can optimize against the demand that they are seeing at the moment. And this is just a quick summary of what we're seeing across some of the major apps in the public market that these companies own, including Tinder, Hinge, Bumble, and Grindr. Moving over to the numbers, here you can see these are our estimates on a global basis, as well as with the regional dots in here breaking down. So you can obviously North America's average revenue per user much more significant than the other markets. And you can see this acceleration that's taking place through 2023 and 2024 as some of those changes to subscription packages took place. Back on the top investor questions, one things we mentioned towards the bottom that we didn't touch on significantly were Match has promised on Tinder a sort of refresh of their a la carte product offering. It's not something they've looked at in a few years. So we'll see how much promise that can bring to help generate or help improve their revenue per payer growth going forward. And here you can see the growth rates for the individual companies. Again, seeing some moderation as we come into this year overall, and especially a little bit of variability at Grindr. But we do still think that you can consistently see kind of mid-single digits revenue per payer growth in the sector. I think that's where a lot of people would ultimately like to see, not only the leader in Match and including Tinder, but the industry overall is balanced growth between say mid to high single digit growth of payers combined with mid to high single digit growth of revenue per payer. To state the obvious, we cannot keep raising prices or more finely tuning or more finely cutting subscription products forever. The boost from that just will ultimately wear away, which of course comes back to the importance of seeing payer growth ultimately resume at a more healthy rate in the industry, especially at the leader at Tinder. And so where does that all add up in terms of total revenue growth? Here's the snapshot here on the left, and you can see, still very healthy. I mean, this is still a business that, on average should be expected to grow in the low teens. Obviously some of the more disruptive players like Bumble and Grindr growing at slightly faster rates. But I think it sometimes does get lost that this is not cable television, for example, in the United States, which is at this stage shrinking on a pretty consistent basis. There does remain healthy top line growth at the companies for the most part. Just last part here, the financial section that we'll walk through. Of course, we ultimately all care about profits. And once again, I think this gets lost sometimes in the noise of some of the headwinds that we're facing, that are not seeing payer growth at the same rate as we have in recent years, is that the businesses remain very profitable overall, with generating a significant amount of free cash flow that is increasingly being deployed to repurchase their stocks as they're being valued at some of the lowest points that they have been as public companies. But and even with there's one thing we're not going to get in today that maybe I wish I had a little bit more, was some of the efforts in terms of marketing and rebranding, especially that we're seeing at Tinder and Bumble and Hinge. You can see here the dip in Match's margins currently, as they spend quite a bit more incrementally on Tinder and Hinge. Hinge to just support the broader growth and good momentum that they're seeing, with Tinder in the case to try to reposition the app and rebrand it a little bit in the eyes of consumers. But the key point here remains, it's a very healthy, very profitable business overall. So in addition to the sort of consistent profitability that we're seeing right now and have seen traditionally with these businesses, and notwithstanding some incremental marketing spend that's going on right now, one of the areas where I think optimism is improving in terms of profitability is around App Store fee relief. And the major issue here, or at least the first most important issue, was the passage of the Digital Markets Act in Europe, which brought some restrictions to the major internet platforms, including the app stores at Apple and Google. And Match is already anticipating around 20 to 30 million of annual savings as a result of those changes. Look, Apple and Google certainly aren't going to lie down in this fight. There do remain a variety of actions going on in countries around the world. In particular, the Netherlands and South Korea have been active in sort of pursuing Google and Apple for more anti-competitive type behaviors with the App Store. And we do remain optimistic that this can be something that can be a tailwind to the dating industry and the profit margins over time. But the DMA really was the first notable step in helping that in Europe. And here you just see a little bit of commentary from both Match and Bumble's C-suite on the left. And these are our estimates for Match's total App Store fees, and can see them starting to ease going ahead in our model. And that's a nice little boost to their gross margin profile. Okay, so let's finish up, as we said, talking a little bit more about, look, what quite simply is the most popular topic across all internet businesses today, whether it's online dating or what Google's doing in search with generative AI. ChatGPT naturally is having been a leading product that's kind of catalyzed this entire, as we like to call it, the second wave of artificial intelligence around generative AI, which brings the AI out from behind the screen to on the screen with sort of real human experiences that users are interacting with. And look, I would say at a high level, to some extent, I'd say that the jury's out in terms of where the user traction of some of these tools will be seen or whether or not. Certainly some of them will prove to be unpopular or just simply not gain traction. The companies are all trying to take advantage of the new technology, throw a lot of things at the wall right now and see what sticks. But once again, just a little bit of context. We like to pay very close attention to what the management teams are telling us, our primary data points from them, and hear a little bit from Match, mostly from their CEO, Bernard Kim, from their most recent earnings calls, and then a comment here from Justin McLeod, the CEO of Hinge, from an investor conference last year, in terms of where their big picture thinking is on where AI can, or this sort of next wave of generative AI can contribute more to their businesses. Again, as they've used AI under the hood, in part for matching for many, many years at this stage. Once again, same thing from Bumble and Grindr. Once again, the new CEO over at Bumble, Lydia Jones, some of her initial thoughts on the role of generative AI. I know it's been mentioned a couple of times. Whitney Wolf has done a few interviews of late as she's transitioned out of the CEO role into the executive chairperson's role at the company. And she's continued to have a lot of enthusiasm for the potential in this. We'll see where her new CEO can actually execute and create a better user experience. And just to get into some of the more specific examples, the key thing I think we're looking at Tinder today has been the rollout of their photo selector to again help optimize the profiles. setting up a profile, choosing the right pictures sometimes can be a laborious test that maybe we're not always the perfect judges of what the best snaps of us are. And so tools that will analyze your library of photos and decide for you which ones they think would be most helpful to improving your profile overall. So that's certainly a type of innovation that we're looking for. You mentioned AI having been used under the hood in the broader internet, including in online dating for many, many years at this stage, just helping with crunching big data sets and in particular improving matching algorithms. You're starting to see some product features like this from Hinge, once again appear on the screen and improve again the experience to users, helping them identify where compatibility might be a little bit higher based on the matches that are being suggested to them. And then just to come and finish up here a little bit, one last one that I think is just starting to emerge is, of course, sort of dating assistants, AI agents or chatbots that can help with either coaching or sort of icebreaker suggestions to help drive engagement once you do download the app, but maybe not know exactly the right thing to say to break the ice or get a conversation moving. And we're seeing that on both the more traditional romantic dating side as well as within some of the apps like Bumble for Friends that even aren't as focused on dating and more on platonic or other non-romantic relationships. So I'll leave it there, Mark, and happy to take any questions from you or the audience. And as we talked about earlier, obviously I can follow up with you and share a copy of the slides. And we're obviously happy to pass those along to everyone in the audience as well.
Very cool. I'm sure that will go down very well. Oh, let me just turn the light on there. Have a look at the questions. Thank you very much, Dan. That was excellent, as always. So, as always, folks, what we could do, actually, because I can do a 15-seater table. Why don't I just do a table and we can kind of network and we can turn this into a kind of a live conversation if you've got a bit more time, like 10, 15 minutes.
I certainly have more time.
Okay. So rather than just me blurt out questions, I think we can actually have a bit of a dialogue here. So I think that'll be quite insightful for you as well then, because you can hear from some industry members. So folks, we're going to go to networking. If you'd like to talk to Dan, please go to Dan's table. I'll hang out at Real Me table for a minute and come to one or the other. So let's do that. Let's see what happens. Okay.
Thanks, Mark.
All right. Thank you very much, Dan. That was excellent.